So we've spent the whole day here talking about network telemetry, talking about moving beyond how networks have been monitored and managed in the past. What do you think about this? One of the questions that springs immediately to mind is this time? Is it time to start talking about this yet, or are we still? Is there still too much work to do before this? Is there still too much to think about, even maybe before SDN? You know, I mean, is this the next wave, and are we ready for this wave, or is it going to wash over us before we're ready? Who wants to start with that one?
Quick, everyone, look at the table.
Yeah, we're looking at you, John.
The stuff I've seen today, I will say that the gRPC stuff, OpenConfig, for me, can't come soon enough with the predictable caveats about all the vendor-specific parts. But I love the idea that we could start using, at least to some extent, a common language to start querying devices and configuring devices. So I would be very happy to see that stuff, because right now, even with netconf and XML RPC, each different device I'm going to has its own XML RPC. Was it XSLT? Is it? I forget what it is. XSD. It has its own definition files, which are just a nightmare to go through. So I like the idea of going to one place, finding it, and being able to apply across many. So from that perspective, it's not a lot different from what we're doing today in terms of directly connecting to the devices. It just makes it easier to write once and use many. So that would be exciting to see in the next year, 18 months, 24 months, as that gets into the versions of code we're actually deploying, to actually start being able to push that out there and simplify some of the scripts we write.
So you feel like we're ready. We're because we don't need to wait on this, because this is something that's needed regardless of what other developments we're making in networking.
Yes, I'm not sure it's the only thing we need.
Well,
I mean, but given that we already have similar access methods, this just would be a more consistent method. From that perspective, I'm all for the improvement. And ditto with the SNMP and looking at event streams rather than using SNMP. That's something I've wanted for a while and been a proponent of. So I'm just like, bring it. Yes, it's going to take a while. It's not going to be a quick switch over to any kind of new management systems, but just as a general method for accessing that data, I think it's essential.
I think the time is now. We have to make it now. We can't keep putting it off and waiting for other folks to do these things. OpenConfig's, overall, great. I was delivering training recently, kind of do Python dictionaries and key maps to kind of normalize the data coming back, and it's possible. But when you're dealing at a certain scale, it really, it is putting the burden back on all the end users and the customers, and it's great for consulting dollars, but it's really not where we need to be as an industry. And I think in general, it's just these are the things that we need. And I'm trying to say that I'm really, really happy that we got through today. I don't think without saying SDN once, so that we can solve real problems operationally without trying to change architectures and create new kinds of encapsulation protocols and control plane protocols. So I think it was all awesome stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry I brought it up. So in terms of the specific things that we saw today, let's start here. What did you think about the demo that we just saw? Is this doable? Is this realistic? Is this the sort of thing that you'd like to start working with?
Yeah.
Yes.
If we go opposite of what we heard today, we'll start there.
Yeah. For the same reason I said, I do. Give me JSON. Give me that output instead of the
He's
XML
right there.
RPC. Yeah, I know.
I've been here all day.
Him Gargamel or XML or whoever it is, this other guy. But it's the stuff we're doing already. It's just, let's say, we're doing it in somewhat harder ways, and this stuff is great. I'm interested in what we can do with the containers. That one's been bubbling around. Everyone's starting to offer container support of some level or other on their devices, and the iOS XR has been threatened for a while. So it's actually very cool to see that running and to see the mapping of interfaces in, and I'm trying to think what nefarious things we could do with that. I don't know if we get to bind services to those IPs, but I guess we do with iPerf, so. It actually opens up, in principle, opens up the door for all sorts of fun. You want to run your own BGP daemon in there?
Why not?
Knock yourself out, bind to the port, and off you go. That'll set them going. So, don't know if it's practical, but it's a thought.
I think a lot of this isn't practical for everyone anyway at this point, but I think to Jason's point, maybe it's not the right time, but you certainly can't put it off any longer. I mean, we're not going to sit around with SNMP for another 100 years. So, I mean, if nothing else.
Why not? We've been using it for 100 years.
All right, fair point. ISIS won't die, SNMP won't die, I mean, whatever.
I think what scares me is that this all looks great, and yeah, we need to do it. It has to be done, but is everybody going to play nice? Because, I mean, who's to say that this guy's going to do one thing and this guy's going to do another thing, and then our fallback is SNMP, because we all do that.
Jason, he's going to say it.
Yep. We're all looking for Jason here.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, there is sort of a lowest common denominator aspect to SNMP that, it's been there, it is there, why not? But of course, on the positive side, if you don't want to be such a pessimist, there's also a lowest common denominator to a lot of the web type protocols that that are expanding everywhere. I mean, think about the beauty of JSON, right? I mean, and I don't mean that JSON, I mean JSON. I mean, think about how useful that is and how ubiquitous that is now suddenly. Maybe there's hope that a new common denominator that's not maybe so low could, take hold.
I think you got to have the right people behind it.
I think it's getting the right communities put together. OpenConfig is great. It's still a large operator, so I'd like to see a little more change there in that community to, again, I'm selfish, folks like us sort of involved that we don't manage large-scale environments and maybe don't have the day-to-day knowledge of the workflows that you have day-to-day. Again, it could be not just Google, but other like companies to expand and again not be bogged down with politics in a federation or a group or open source project, whatever it is, but to enable others to contribute back to expedite the process and giving back.
Yeah, what about the organizational model behind this? I heard a little bit of that as well, that it's actually really, really nice that this is not being driven by switch vendors or, it's being driven by implementers.
Yeah.
Is this the right group to drive something like this?
I think it's the best chance of getting it standardized quickly, respectfully. Because
I don't know if it'll get standardized quickly.
Well, if they're submitting it back to the IETF to be standardized. I mean,
yeah, but the problem is any kind of open source project, right? And I've been involved in it since like '93, right? Open source, the minute somebody adds one feature, it forks into 3 projects. So as far as which is good, but getting that to the IETF, let's say, what do you get to the IETF? Do you get the one back here and you actually have 150 forks down the road, projects that people are using in disparate places, right? So I like this, driving it, but I would argue the more critical piece is getting the hardware vendors to actually support RESTful APIs or JSON output, something like that you can touch everything and then let people on the outside consume it in whatever way they want, whether it's standard or not.
But I think that, though, was the strength of the concept of having a mandatory base model. That's the standardized bit, and you can manipulate that and deviate from it and add to it, but you can't screw with the base model, right? You can't just go, I don't like this, I'll write my own. Like with XML RPC, for example. So I like that concept of saying, okay, if you standardize that bit, we know everyone's going to have their own fluffy stuff, but have that as a core. And the danger, I think it was mentioned in the presentation, is that what happens is everyone stops using the core and just bolts on the vendor-specific tree and says, yeah, just use that. At which point we've lost the battle,
Go
right?
IDs.
So I think you have to have if you're going to use this, no, you really do have to use that mandatory core and only bolt on the bits that aren't covered in the core. If we can achieve that, then I think we're in a pretty good shape. But I think when you get, with any of the standardization, the bits that I've seen from the outside seems to be when you get standardization driven by a vendor with a vested interest, when it comes to standardization, suddenly the other vendors come out of the woodwork and start going, and now the process gets dragged out while everyone tries to design by committee and tweak it, right? So I'd like to hope we can avoid that and get something working.
Right, the IETF, if you look at standards that come out of the IETF, right, or some other standards body, even when they spell out exactly what you're talking about, the base, right, the parts you can't screw with, what that is, right, look at SIP. SIP's a standard. Everybody supports it. 95% of it kind of overlaps, but try and actually take, a Cisco voice system, integrate it with VIA across a SIP. You'll be in a nightmare world for like a week and a half, right? With both companies going like this. So, getting it in the standards body is one thing, but there's always just enough wiggle room coming out of the standards body that, I don't know if even that base is going to work, well. But I like the idea. I'm just saying, I don't, in practice, I don't know what we would get.
The implementation is going to be where we see whether or not it actually works.
I have a question. Is anybody else here an enterprise person? Are you a big enterprise? I forget where you
used to be.
Yeah, big-ish.
To me, there's like Silicon Valley myopia that kind of happens though. And this is you have the web scale or whatever it is that develop some really great ideas and they focus on getting it implementable to their scale, to their use case. But then there's a disconnect because there's those of us in the enterprise world that we don't have the investment into smart people that develop and contribute to open source, right? So we tend to buy exotically expensive packaged solutions and a lot of times the really cool stuff doesn't trickle down to those exotically expensive solutions, or it doesn't trickle down to where we can replace the exotically expensive solutions in a meaningful fashion. So my only concern is as all these great things are happening is will there be somebody that helps bridge that gap to where it's meaningful for enterprises to adopt these things quickly and save costs versus just waiting for a vendor to package it and sell it to us for an exorbitant price. There's a gap there. I don't know where it's at. I don't know how to define that gap, but I definitely see a gap there. Because I keep about Silicon Valley and all these great ideas, and then I try to take them back, and it's like, well, what vendor can package does that in a bow and sell it to us?
Right. I don't think anything that's being tried here is the attempt to downstream into enterprise for these solution sales. I mean, if you see what's being proposed and the architectures that are being talked about, it's not enterprise features that you're looking at. It's not that type of construct. I think it's something that the enterprise could adopt over the long term. But I would argue that most enterprises have a difficult time as it is today, swallowing what's already on the market. So the fact that they can't even consume what's available on what's considered sort of forward-going platforms shows sort of they're lagging behind the curve set anyway. So I think what you're going to see is sort of the split in what happens. Web scale is going to pick it up after sort of the sort of hyperconverged mass scale, right? So the largest cloud providers are already doing something that looks similar to this. And they will downstream into everyone else at the web scale platform size, and then downstream from there.
But my comment was more the general open source. There's a lot of open source initiatives that I've talked about, and it's very difficult. And that's been just in general the open source adoption. Any open source platform is very difficult for us to.
Yeah, but it's so.
Like we buy Red Hat, right? So we use Red Hat for everything. We don't. It's a packaged solution where we're paying a premium for.
You're really paying for support. You're not paying for the open source side. So I mean, it's no different than the kernel core component. The value add is not the fact that you have people who can contribute to the core portion of the Linux kernel. You're offering no value. There's plenty of smart people who are doing that, and you're not going to make any differentiated value in that area. It's the 20% that you're adding on package distribution that is the value portion of what you're providing in there. I don't think there's much difference in the model about how this is going to perceive as a community overall. If you can get 80% of the way there, I think there's room to allow for vendors to be able to add value in the 20% sector, and that's what you're buying. As an enterprise, that's what you buy, that's what you'll buy. If you're web scale, you're not going to pay for any of that because you know how to get it the rest of the 20% of the way there. You don't need to pay for that. You have smart people who are going to get you across the road. That portion you may or may not open source, and that's your choice. The enterprise gets to wait. I mean, that's part of the look. They could always pony up themselves. They could, but no one's going to hire developers to go contribute. So that's the other side of the sword, right? You don't get the advantage if you don't put the committed resources in.
Yes.
So if you put the committed resources in and you're willing to invest in that way, like some of the bigger shops are, well, they're putting not just a small number of bodies behind this. I mean, there's significant development teams that are committing the open source to make this stuff happen. It's to solve their need requirements, and what they're doing is then going to major manufacturers and saying, these are the frameworks we put together. If you want to play in our arena, here you go, right? Is that going to happen in enterprise? Well, how many enterprise shops are going around and saying, these are the standards that's what we built? The most of those conformance are around purchasing. All right, these are the standards that we've done. Here's the RFP or RFQ. Out the door it goes, and you reply back to those. And as long as you made our checklist, we're all good.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's happening. It's just happening at effectively an API level now. All right, where you're saying, here's the standards about how we need to interact, right? And the standards that we expect to be able to have whatever you want to call it today, composable infrastructure, consumable, infrastructure as service, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, the reality is that's the direction that those teams are going. We are going to get the advantage of that by just waiting. Eventually, we will get that downstream to us because major manufacturers are going to take that and say, this model works great. We were able to make money with those companies, and we can now redistribute and repackage that for you. And it allows a common framework for everyone to work off of from there. That's how I see the industry moving. Yes, Silicon Valley is a myopic bubble, no doubt. But it is the one that everyone comes to sort of get their ideas vetted, to pass back and forth, and that's what I think is unique about this place and location, is that this is where the conversation happens. I'm not saying that this is where all the development happens, but it is where the conversation happens to start to get people to move the dial on that. I'm defending my home turf here because I'm born and raised. So.
See, I would say this is I mean, the analogy here is like the car show. I forget what it's called, but the big car shows where GM, Mercedes, Ford, they come out with all these concept cars that never actually make it to anything that you can buy, but it's sort of that that initial concept testing and that kind of thing. And the second point I'll make is kind of going with what you said and what you said as well. I came from the enterprise environment, and actually selling, even if it's a slightly higher cost, something like a V-block, let's say, right? That's much easier to get justified in a variety of ways than it ever is to actually bring people on board to do what, I mean, let's face it, you look at V-block, you could do that yourself. You can put all the pieces together. People are buying, Metapod, right? Cisco Metapod, and then what is HP Hellion, right? Because they don't want to bring a whole staff in to do OpenStack, but they want it. They want the benefits of it. So guess what? One SKU from a vendor, boom, we've got a solution. So I think for the enterprise and a lot of the enterprise customers that I see, that's tremendous value because they get that thing they want. And
that's where SD-WAN, God help, is that number 4? That's where SD-WAN.
You were hitting all the bingo today.
There's a real synergy between. No, but that's where SD-WAN has done well for enterprise, right? It's why it's a kind of a hot market right now, is because you've taken a technology that in reality, no enterprise, and most in their right mind, can dedicate resources to do this stuff themselves. But if someone's willing to create a product that does the magic for you, and I can buy it off the shelf, roll it out, and make it work, using that underlying cool technology, you've got a winner. And an enterprise benefits from the technology without ever having to actually know what it was.
I think part of it, why SD-WAN or whatever is working though, is that and we'll just pick on Cisco because that's what I know, right? IWAN, if we're gonna just keep going with the terms. IWAN's their proprietary thing that they're incentivized to do to make money. I think for what we talked about today, it's a little bit harder to say for Cisco, for example, to be like, okay, here's open model for everything. Whereas we could have been selling you Prime or VTS or ACI or DCNM or whatever. So I think once it gets incentivized to the point that it's commonplace, or 80-20 rule, right, to the vendors, then it's cool for enterprise, and it'll get productized and simplified for enterprise
I think
users.
though, given the number of SD-WAN startups out there, they're not incentivized to sell anything existing. They're going in there because they believe they can make money selling a solution. They're saying, here's
But
something
there's no
you couldn't do
differentiator,
before.
is what I'm saying. If we have this common
Well,
model,
no,
that's-
there is a differentiator though with SD-WAN. I mean, if
Well,
we
yeah,
go down
yeah,
that
that's
road,
what I'm saying.
SD-WAN,
Yeah,
right, or the IWAN, to use that, right, is, well, first of all, it's architecture, because you look at the
It's
underlying,
DMVPN.
you look at the underlying, technologies, DMVPN, PFR v3, right, all that stuff. Akamai Connect, if you want to, go into the bigger solutions. But it's what it's what Cisco refers to as a prescriptive solution, right? So you're actually buying into what is essentially a fully validated and vetted design. And so it's actually very similar to what we were just talking about, right? You can deploy all those technologies, but that SD-WAN umbrella, that sort of that architecture over the top, is what you're purchasing. You're purchasing this thing that already works.
So do you see these protocols that we've been discussing today? Do you see these protocols being fundamental to the next wave of productized? Well, I guess this is a weird thing to say. Productized products of I mean, is a company like Cisco going to weaponize these products and package them up and make something really useful out of this?
If there's a market, yes.
Well, I don't think this is the market. I think this is operators saying, if you want to play in our arena, you conform to some of the components that we want to lay out as framework. I don't think that's a weaponized opportunity at all. I think that's if I want to play in this market, I go meet them I go meet them on the battleground they wish to fight on, right? So if you want to sell to them and you want to have a continued market, that's what you do.
How's that ever going to get to enterprise, though? I mean, it makes sense here because we're talking,
Sure. What I'm saying
9K.
is that at some point they will turn downstream and say, we can use this to be able to do interesting functions within the rest of our product line and offer some standards. I mean, what's the biggest problem with SDN today, right? It's even within Cisco, 6 controllers? I don't know. How many does Dave have under his team? I don't even know how many he has under his team anymore. So part of the structural challenge is, where do you fit things? I think this fits in one particular arena. I don't think the design or the goal around it, at least this is my opinion. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong and slap me later, but I think the reality is this is to meet a very specific market need today that exists today, and that market need does not exist in the enterprise yet.
I agree. I think though it does open up opportunities down the road.
Well, sorry, when you say this, which this are you referring to? Because we've seen protocols, we've seen an application, we've seen a few different things today. Which this is?
Well, so I think the stuff that SignalFX is doing by being able to be to tap into what is going on in there is really interesting. I think that's something that could be brought to market much earlier for enterprise, because I think that sort of analytic data is very useful for enterprises today, as is, and I think that's something that should be pushed a little harder. I think the commonality about that large-scale multi-vendor, I would say most enterprises have chosen a single vendor to work with for the mass majority of what they do. When you start to get to web scale, you start getting requirements of saying, I need a dual vendor solution offering, because if someone goes out of business, I need to be able to know that I can continue to operate. And when you get past that, it is commodity market, and commodity market is a whole different specialized bench sheet metal. So we all realize this, and I think in the enterprise market, what you're trying to address for them is giving them better insight on the tools they already do. If you can do that at a lower cost or give better data, then you're going to get a strategic win, right? And that's what's going to drive that sale forward, especially when they can stitch together different facets of your business. And I think that's what's interesting about what SignalFX has capability-wise, because it's a different portion of what you're doing as a business versus what I traditionally seen their demos done with public cloud resources and things of that nature. This is very interesting because it suddenly gives you a very different insight about how you can sort of stitch things together.
Well, not instrumentation, I guess monitoring in general is one of those, in my mind, just coming from my background before, it's one of those anomalous things where most enterprises are fairly slow to adopt anything new. For some time, and there's good reason for that, right? I mean, you've got huge enterprises that are worldwide. I mean, deploying the newest, hottest thing that's sort of unproven. If IT is not their main business, it's probably not something that they're really going to do. I mean, it's the iWin thing's big now because PFR, V3, and all that stuff, DMVPN Phase 3 have been out for what? I mean, what is it now, 8 years? Something like that. It's been out for quite a while before anybody packaged it up into something that people are going to consume. Monitoring, on the other hand, not so much the other way, pushing configs, but monitoring is one of those rare areas where enterprises will go cutting edge on what they can get. I mean, a lot of the monitoring
You can afford to be, because if your monitor fails, who cares, right? I mean, it's
to a point, I mean, it's and people do. I mean, we had we had a custom written syslog, and we dumped every single thing into a giant syslog on a vBlock, and that was our monitoring solution. We rolled it ourselves, but we were fairly stodgy, kind of old school when it came to everything else. Like all that stuff just had to be there, it had to work, right? So we didn't look at all the new hotness.
Anytime you can get operational insight that gives you an advantage to either give your business better performance or to be able to solve a problem before the business actually brings it to the table, you're saving someone else's job upstream, right? Their butt in the seat sort of opportunity to sit at the table.
That's the point I was kind of getting at is, within the web scale world, technology is a key differentiator in certain companies, and I think for a lot of enterprises, especially customer facing ones, technology will become more and more of a differentiator. And so if certain enterprises, if we take a wait and see and wait for vendors to sell us a solution, we're on the same level as our next competitor who's doing the same thing, and the next competitor. So we're not differentiating ourselves. And so one of the ways we could possibly differentiate ourselves is to try to be more agile in our approach and to delivering services to customers and or cost savings and passing that cost savings on to a customer. Whatever it is, there's a business advantage that we could potentially gain. And so what I keep trying to understand if we can somehow do is to take the agility, get that away from my laptop.
Your elbow was like a half inch from that.
Take the cost savings of this open model that a lot of the tech savvy companies are using and adopt at least a portion of that so that we can take some advantage of that and gain a business advantage through either agility, cost savings, whatever it is, instead of just the sit and wait for a vendor to package it and deliver type of solution. And so that's is there a gap there that we can bridge, or is there some?
But there's nothing that's holding back any enterprise that decides they want to adopt these frameworks to go ahead and do it. You're just going to change how you actually interface and purchase from your manufacturers. If you're willing to go through that pain, I see no problem with you just deciding to push the envelope that way. I don't see that as a problem, right?
You think your challenge is going to be convincing the CFO? Because at the end of the day, you want to make a decision that to him is all about the technology, even though you can see the business benefits of it. So you've got to convince the CFO that the investment in the stuff and the open source and the tech is going to impact the bottom line, because the technology isn't the profit driving mechanism in the business.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And this goes back to a cultural these are top level decisions that organizational, right? So DevOps is largely about organizational alignment and getting those benefits of aligning your organization, and then there's tooling and other things along with it. This adopting an open, capable platform. If I wanted to do OpenStack today as an enterprise, it requires a large shift in how we do things to be able to operate a open orchestration tool, right? We have to custom build a lot of pieces, and so it requires a different skill set. So.
You need a microphone, so just come sit close, and you can say, yeah.
So my one bias and objection is that on the point of traditional enterprises. So I'm at one of these Silicon Valley bubble myopic startups, but I'm not from here, and I used to be a Gartner analyst, and I used to work at IBM for a long time, and my primary bread and butter customer base was what you would think of as large enterprises from the rest of the world. And what I found at Signal Effects is that at least in each of the major segments where you would think there's a traditional enterprise like insurance or mortgage finance or logistics and warehousing or even retail, there are at least a few companies who the brand names would make you think traditional enterprise, who are customers of companies, not just SignalFX, but other companies like us that, for all intents and purposes, are, you would say, making products just for web companies, gaming companies, mobile companies, and SaaS companies. And the reason, and those traditional enterprises will not put their logos on anyone's page. But the reason they are customers is because they found a way to turn things like fast software iteration and agile in all its instantiations, and real-time telemetry, but not like on infrastructure, but also on business metrics, like the number of users who sign up for a thing, the number of times an order is entered into a particular system that causes a downstream impact on logistics in 3 different warehouses in 3 different regions, which you didn't know because you never track these things all at the same time. So there are a handful of companies that are all traditional enterprises that do this, and they kill their competition. So if you look at the ones that are really winning in any given niche, what you'll find is that they're adopting these practices that aren't really, in my view, part of the bubble anymore.
But so there's small teams that are doing operational practice usually around that, though, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
it's usually small
and the culture
organizations within a large enterprise.
Right, and the culture hasn't permeated everywhere. So there still is a large amount of people that say you're usually not building innovative, revolutionary systems for ERP over and over again, right? So you're usually not doing something like that. So it's not like you're revolutionizing the back end of the house for that sort of system. And so they have to keep that up and operational. I doubt if that's where you want to fail fast. Right? Fail fast and then not recover is not the option for like how that's going to work. So I think you're right. I mean, yeah, definitely. For people who are building mobile apps or something else that's going to drive more customers through. But I think to your point, it's a big culture change for a lot of shops, and most of them are starting with small teams internally. Not everyone is on board with Phoenix Project style, revamp what you're doing. As much as Gene wants to wave the flag, and John and the rest of the crew on that one. And not everyone can operate like Netflix, right? Not everyone has a freedom within with maybe it's regulatory or other things to be able to do what Netflix is capable of doing, or empowering people the way they're enabled to do so. So there's challenges structurally between companies.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Another one of the questions that was suggested here is what about skills? And I think it goes to this discussion of enterprise versus web scale as well. And one of the remarkable things that really jumped out at me during this morning's presentations especially is the tremendous amount of work and contribution and development that's happening here at companies that are that should be maybe end user companies, right? I mean, the companies that presented to us this morning, these are companies that have traditionally been buyers of products, and now they're developing tools, they're developing, technologies, they're developing specific protocols. That's something that had been done in a different way in the past. I mean, you used to have sort of the think tank companies developing those things. Now you've got these web scale companies developing those things. It really is remarkable that you've got companies like Google that have so much amazing power in terms of IT that they can say, you know what, we need something and we're going to build it, and you can come along with us or not, but we're going to build it no matter what. So how do you like them apples? So how do you guys like them apples? How do you like the shift to the point where companies, these web scale companies are driving things, not standards bodies and not think tanks and not product vendors? Wow, I beat you all.
Well, I would say, for me, is one of those, what was that one event we went to where they're going to get rid of all the CCIEs, right? High-paid consultants. So, as one of the high-paid consultant types, I would say it's actually there's a lot of opportunity, I'll say, in that, because you've really had 2 types of people in the market talking to customers outside of the vendors themselves, right? You've had the Arthur Andersons of the world, like with the really big consulting houses, right? And then you've had systems integrators, VARs, whatever you want to call them, right? That do what they do, and a lot of those guys got reduced by choice or by by the forced to do it into just what I'll call box slingers, right? We'll just sell you the cheapest boxes, we'll sell a lot of them, and we'll make our money that way. In this new model, you end up where that consultative approach to dealing with customers sort of goes up, and from my point of view, there's more of a profit potential in operating that way as opposed to simply selling the latest greatest widget, right? As long as we're keeping up on technology and we're understanding where the market's going, I think that's there's a lot of upside.
So do you see this as a new breed of company, a new breed of product vendor that's going to basically sell what the customer is asking for instead of developing something and then trying to convince the customer to ask for it?
Yeah, I think. Well, yeah, I do. I think that there will be a lot of companies that will go away, right? And I'm not talking about the giant vendors and stuff because they'll shift. I'm talking about a lot of your integrators, VARs, things like that. There will be some of those people who won't make the transition, and there will be some that will make the transition. And so I think time will tell. But
the market has already changed, right? Google, if you actually made Google, listed them in the market segment, they'd be the second largest switch manufacturer out there, period. I think they'd be number 2. All right, if you count their bent sheet metal initiative for what they're doing internally. So, I think the market's sort of shifted on that one. I think what some of the massive scale and web scale companies are doing is sort of driving the direction about what they need from a feature standpoint versus the classic way of going out and saying we're going to do a bunch of analysis work to ask all the Fortune 1000s what sort of features they need to run in an enterprise anymore, right? They're defining it for themselves because they don't need someone to come and analyze what their business process is and tell them what they need.
But again, they're defining it for themselves, right?
They're defining it for themselves.
And
I'm not saying it's
they're
useful
not
for
taking
everyone.
that knowledge necessarily pivoting to where they're like, oh, hey, we could sell this. We could package this downstream, right? They're keeping it in-house, but they're driving some of the protocols and they're driving some of the conversation. But again, you get into that same point where your enterprises, when you go downstream to your large enterprises and even further down to your small businesses, right? How do they take advantage of that? So we look at Facebook, we look at Google, we look at some of these companies, Amazon, that are doing all this massive hyperscale, white box, custom, whatever. They're not moving that as a product. So nobody below them is going to, maybe you'll catch some droppings and, get some ideas and do something with it, but I don't know how much of that shifts the entire market, right? No. I'm not saying it doesn't, I'm just saying I don't know how much I see of that happening.
I guess just to comment directly on that, I'd point out some examples that have kind of been gaining relevance, right? You've got Docker, right? Built internally, all right, as a open source project, then spun out as a another company. You've got Mesosphere, you've got you've got Kubernetes, which is being spun out by multiple companies. SignalFX is based largely on ODS from Facebook. So I think that there are a lot of technologies that are being built in-house by these web scale companies that, you're right, the companies themselves aren't necessarily taking them and productizing them, but the fact that they're becoming open source at a level of complexity that the standard enterprise can't readily adopt is open kind of a floodgates of opportunity for people to be able, that worked on those projects, to pick them up and take them, put a nice wrapper on them, right, and give them the ability to be adopted by a greater set of companies out there that do need that extra hand-holding or that extra productization step that the large companies either don't see an opportunity in, or see that as some type of Trojan horse that leads to a greater opportunity for their technology that wouldn't necessarily be adopted by mass market.
Yeah, that's the 20%, right? Yeah, the 20% value on top of the core portion of what.
Exactly.
I think that's an awesome model. If everyone's going to make money on that, that's debatable still, right?
Completely.
But that's a different. We can debate that separately. I think the initiatives of what many of the larger companies are trying to do is trying to drive what's best, what they perceive as best for community, which I think is a good thing. So I think what Google, what others are trying to do in terms of saying we're going to come together as a community. These are our need requirements. We think they're the best for what the community needs, and we will build open source projects based around the fact of what the community need requirements are. Is a positive overall. The fact that the vendors are recognizing that that's a positive sort of ecosystem to work in, and you're better to be part of the war behind it than on the other side is probably a good realization that if they don't participate, you get market erosion. You're not going to be as competitive in that particular market, and you might have a chance to be able to repackage that to sell that to enterprise and be able to provide that 20% value set that people are going to be paid money for. I don't see anything wrong with how that is. I do think there's a gap because I don't think the web scale companies are trying to design solutions that enterprises often need, right? The need sets are different. I would agree with that, but
I think it's kind of fascinating though too, right? If you look at what's going on everywhere well, at least in this country. I mean, probably other places as well. But look at Google, right? Developing cars, right? Self-driving cars. Look at Tesla coming out of nowhere and challenging all the established kind of stodgy old companies that have been around since the beginning of time, right? Look at SpaceX. Saying, oh, well, NASA's cut back on funding, we can do this ourselves, right? There's that sort of an attitude that's interesting, that's developing, and it's not just in the network space or whatever, it's sort of everywhere. You're starting to see a lot more of that.
Just disruption overall.
Yeah, just massive market disruption, more than what we've seen in maybe, back in the, more recent past generations, right?
And I'm just thinking that a lot of that has to do with those older companies being slow to adopt new technology.
That's exactly what I'm concerned about. Is I work for one of those big companies that's been around a while.
I think a lot of your stuff is written in COBOL, right?
6-bit programming and so there's a lot of things that we can really do better, and we need to stay big companies that want to survive the disruption that whenever it's going to hit their industry, because it's going to hit every industry. So if you want to survive, you need to be agile. That's the end of the story.
And getting personal about it, as Matt has shown us, he's like, wait, what, me? No, there's actually a personal opportunity here too, because these are not ivory tower institutions or closed source vendors, because these are open source projects and they're welcoming to contributions. There's a personal opportunity for somebody like yourself, to step up and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to raise my hand. I want to get involved in this project. I want to explore it. I want to do something about it. Even maybe I'm just going to write some documentation. Maybe I'm going to code. Maybe I'm going to jump in and join the group that's steering this thing. Is that true? Is that what you found?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, like it's fun to, I guess, talk about the applicability of a lot of these technologies, but there's also a part of this that I think is overlooked, which is that we are all technologists and we're all in this because we like it. I think most of us. So if there's no other excuse, just dive in because you want to. I don't think that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if your old dinosaur that you work for isn't going to get on board, then. We have opinions. Different dinosaur.
We have opinions on this stuff. I don't care if you're working for a little gas station in the middle of Kentucky. If you're programming a switch and you want to do it with OpenConfig, then this OpenConfig stuff. We're nerds. That's how this works. So yeah, I mean, you should think about 90% of our brain should be thinking about the applicability of this at a grand scale. But don't forget to think about this as fun too. That's cool too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's the big, the take-home message of a lot of this is that, we have an unprecedented time of, development. This harkens back to the early days of, TCP/IP and Unix and so on, where people are actively seeking input and contribution and trying to do something big. And the door is open. Welcome, come do something, right?
Putting developers on the table is like putting your chips into the table, from my perspective. I think that's the new currency going forward. No one's making you hire developers, but if you want to play, then that's sort of what you had to do.
So one more thing that came up in the questions that folks relayed to me from today. How about Atlas? How applicable is that outside of Netflix?
Well, I think he was pretty blunt about it, right? It wasn't anything that anyone else could wrap around and use until they either get it further along or they're ready to release it, right? So pretty much says the state of where it's at.
I think if you are a huge company that serves video and you use AWS exclusively,
I think we're a company like that.
that market segment is going to benefit.
Yeah, it does seem very mission specific. I wonder if there's things that can be pulled out of that further down the line, but it's another one of those. We were talking about, where products are targeted, like service provider, and that one is targeted at AWS web scale kind of solutions. And there are some out there for sure, right, who could probably benefit from that. But it was also, I think, he said that the core had been published, but all of the fun stuff around it hadn't, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. The backend's published. The backend's published. So there's
none of the UI.
Right. So there's still an awful lot missing around that core for anyone to adopt it.
That goes to the point that you made, right? Of they developed this in-house solution that met their needs. That's sort of a massive whatever, doesn't really fit with what anybody else is doing, but parts of it are spinning off, right? Parts of it are going into
wait till Matt gets bored, right?
Right.
I think at some point it doesn't matter if it's applicable. It's the idea and like the mentality or the kind of what they're trying to do, what they're doing with the data, and as that trickles out to spin-offs or whatever, that's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
I like the general concept that especially these big companies are developing tools, whether it's the Chaos Monkey or whatever it is, or this kind of thing, and they're just throwing it out there. Whether or not you ever adopt it, it's still kind of cool seeing what other people do, given many more devs than we've probably got to play with. I enjoy that. It gives some interesting ideas for how you might want to do things on a smaller scale in your own network, even if you never adopt what they do specifically. It can give some insight and some experience.
And as you see with iOS XR, for instance, it does actually push vendors to do things differently.
I mean, this was something that I saw when I was at GitHub, was that you look at the number of enterprise companies that have started publishing open source over just the past year, and you would be hard-pressed to find an enterprise vendor these days that's relevant that doesn't have a .io page and, open source projects on GitHub. It's the way that things are moving, and people are realizing that it's not only the way that they need to be able to move to retain their customers, but it's also to retain their developers that are saying, I actually want to be able to have more people see the work that I'm doing, be able to get more ideas from the community, and have contributions come in that can help me do my job better.
Yeah. I say too, stuff like Atlas it's cool stuff, and part of it's open sourced, which is great, but without the resources that someone like a Netflix has, what are you going to do with that open source?
Maybe it's more inspirational. Maybe it's more of a technology development platform for the rest of us than it is a specific product that we're going to use.
Yeah. I think it's also the context to realize that there's the potential that you need to look at how you're allocating your resources moving forwards, because I think that any enterprise that isn't starting to think about how they move towards a DevOps model is going to be left in the dust within the next 5 years. And it's because we start to see the vendors that are moving to that in the same spaces, right, in the same niche markets, and they're the ones that are going to be able to adjust to market demand much faster.
The one exception to that that I will say is there are a few large enterprises, like large shipping companies, large airlines, large manufacturing companies. Well, manufacturing maybe is wrong, but there are. I can see a few market segments where that might not be applicable, as far as but it's I mean, it's almost now becoming corner cases. So you're right.
I think if you want shipping, look at stage 3. They're actually doing things and actually bringing, next generation iteration of technology to the shipping and logistics, actually using machine learning to be able to actually figure out better shipping routes and things like that. If you look at manufacturing, obviously there's a ton of things going on. You look at John Deere. John Deere has an enormous DevOps team at this point in time, because there's actually more, software running on their tractors than there, is on your Apple Watch. So, you think about the way in which these industries are shifting. It's this trend, that the whole software is eating the world trend that is really becoming extraordinarily pervasive across all industry. My perspective.
Yeah.
I live in the bubble.
Who wants to sum up here? What's the key takeaway from today?
What is it?
If you get a bunch of engineers in the room,
Developers,
more
let me get a
opinions
chair.
than people.
Ballmer had it right. Developers.
I'll say it was inspirational, just to see what other people are doing and the smart ideas and the things that they're focused on. And like with Atlas, it wasn't some huge, it didn't appear to me to be some huge world-changing technology. No, it was just a very efficient way of doing what they needed to get done. And so seeing how they thought through that problem and they're developing something that works for them, we can take those ideas back and do the same. And just look at a problem and think about, and think through how we can improve. And it may not be earth-shattering, but small. It's the devil's in the detail. It's the small things that matter. Executing on small things, and so that's what I took away.
So just think, what would Netflix do?
That's what would Netflix do.
Well, I think it also tells you where your skill sets need to move in the future, right? You don't know how to interface and work with those individuals. If you don't understand the tools they're using, and if you don't understand how they're trying to solve problems, you're not going to be as relevant in the
I want to be the guy that
food
takes
chain.
I want to take the specs from the customers to the developers, because I'm good with people.
All right.
I want to be a food server. That's all right with me.
Well, on that note, so thank you guys very much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts here this afternoon, and for staying throughout the day and listening to all this. I hope that you've seen something interesting. Who found today interesting?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Finish it off. You want fries with that?
Who found it remarkably interesting?
Yeah.
In parts.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. You have in fact remarked upon it. And so thank you very much. I'm glad that Cisco, you were able to help make this happen.
Yeah.
Signal Effects, Google, Netflix. It's been excellent having y'all here. So.